Welcome to this video where today I'll talk about radicals and factoring for quadratic equations. This is kind of a reference video for using the quadratic formula, and if you'd like to learn about that you can go here. Talking about radicals and factoring, what is a square number? A square number is, say, 16 or 4. It's where you can have the same number multiplied by itself to equal that number, like 4 times 4 equals 16. So 4 squared is 16, that's a square number. 2 squared equals 4, so that's a square number. And generally when we talk about square numbers we mean whole numbers like integers. Now let's take 80. 80 is not a square number, which means that if I have radical 16, that's just going to equal plus or minus 4. We don't have that luck with 80. We can't break that down into a whole number like we can with 16. So if I have radical 80, that's about as good as it gets. Except for one thing, I can pull some whole numbers out of the radical. For instance, if I want to break down 80, I can say 80 would break down into 40 times 2. 40 would break down into 20 times 2. 20 would break down to 10 times 2. 10 breaks down into 5 times 2. So if I have 5 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, that will give me 80. That means I can take 2 times 2 and 2 times 2. That equals 5 times 2 squared times 2 squared. And if we have a squared number, we can take that out of the radical. So if I illustrate that a bit further, I'll have radical 80 equals 5 times 2 squared times 2 squared. And I can pull square numbers right out of the radical. That means when I pull it out of the radical, I got to take that squared off. So I'll say 2 times 2 times radical 5. 2 times 2 is 4. This will ultimately end up as 4 radical 5. Let's do another example. It takes me a few examples when I learn math to be able to apply it really well. I take the number 50 and I want to know how I can simplify radical 50. Well, then I take 50 breaks into 25 times 2. 25 breaks into 5 times 5, and those are prime numbers. So I got radical 50 equals radical 5 times 5 times 2, and that equals 5 squared times 2, since I have two 5's, and if I have a squared, I can pull it out of the radical to be 5 radical 2. And that's how I can simplify radicals. I'll do another example. Let's say I have the number 125 and I radical 125. What is that? Well, I take 125 and that breaks into 25 times 5, and that breaks into 5 times 5. And those are all prime numbers. So I have radical 125 equals radical 5 times 5 times 5. And since I have two 5's for sure in there, then I can say radical 5 squared times 5. And I can pull that squared out to be 5 radical 5. And that is a simplified form of radical 125. If you're not sure if you've got this right, you can put that into a TI calculator or any calculator, and you can put radical 125, see what decimal that gives you, and then 5 radical 5 and see what decimal that gives you. And if those decimals are the same, then you've simplified correctly. But this should always equal this if you're going to be correct. I hope this video has helped, and I will see you at the quadratic equation video here. Talk to you soon.